Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zach. Thank you for joining us. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell believes that Republicans do not have enough votes to block witnesses from testifying in the impeachment trial. Still, sources tell CBS News that he delivered the news to Republicans during a closed-door meeting on Capitol Hill on Tuesday. A short time earlier, the president's lawyers wrapped up their opening arguments. The questioning phase of the trial will begin on Wednesday. Nancy Cordes has more from Capitol Hill.
It is time for this to end.
The White House team wrapped up today with this appeal to the jury.
You know what the right answer is in your heart.
The president's lawyers dismissing new claims from John Bolton that contradict their defense.
Are you going to allow proceedings on impeachment to go from a New York Times report about someone that says what they hear is in a manuscript?
Bolton's forthcoming book says the president did condition aid to Ukraine on investigations into the Bidens.
When I was there.
Speaking in Sarasota last night, former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly said, "I believe John Bolton." Rudy Giuliani does not.
He's a backstabber.
The president's personal lawyer spoke to Catherine Herridge today for CBS This Morning.
He never said to me, "I've got a problem with what you are doing in Ukraine." Never once, never winked, never sent me a little note.
With pressure mounting for Bolton to testify, Oklahoma Republican James Lankford proposed today that senators be allowed to read Bolton's manuscript first and then decide.
That sounds like a reasonable solution to me.
What an absurd proposal.
Democrats called it a stalling tactic.
As a start, would you like to see the book and see exactly what Bolton says?
Nothing is a substitute for a witness under oath, in person, testifying. That's what we want.
In a meeting with Senate Republicans, leader Mitch McConnell told them that the party does not currently have the votes to block witness testimony. But that's only because a handful of Senate Republicans haven't made up their minds yet. They want to watch to see how the next couple of days of this trial play out when they finally have a chance to ask questions of the House managers and the president's lawyers. Nancy Cordes, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
Every day, another development. So let's bring in Zeke Miller, Jessica Levinson, and Nicholas Wu. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and a White House reporter for the Associated Press. Jessica is a professor at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. And Nicholas is a politics reporter at USA Today. So, Nicholas, I want to start with you. How significant is that development? Mitch McConnell saying that Republicans do not have enough votes to block witnesses?
Well, it shows really how in flux the current situation is. What we're seeing is that it's not that the Republicans have all made up their minds yet and have decided that witnesses will be called when it comes time to it, but more that senators haven't necessarily made up their minds. You know, senators coming out of their huddle with McConnell this afternoon seemed upset at how the proceedings were going, and some noted how much longer the proceedings could drag on for, something that a lot of Senate Republicans don't seem to very much be in favor of.
I imagine right now they're trying to whip the votes, get any of those on the fence Republicans back over onto the side of blocking witnesses. What might this say about Republicans like Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, others who may be defecting from the party line?
Well, Senator Lindsey Graham told us this afternoon that Republicans were not actually whipping votes within the caucus, but it still is likely that Republicans are talking with each other to figure out how to come to some kind of resolution on witnesses. We saw both Murkowski and Collins talking fairly intensely with their Republican senators colleagues as the trial concluded today, and we'll have yet to see how exactly they'll vote on witnesses.
So interesting. Jessica, from a legal perspective, what potential role could witnesses play in this trial moving forward, and how long it could potentially last then?
Well, I would say from a legal perspective, the most important thing to know is that we're not in a courtroom. We are in really a political theater, kind of emphasis on theater. And so, but what could witnesses do? They could walk in there and answer the questions that have been kind of lingering and used by the defense, which is, well, you weren't actually in the room, and that's kind of third-hand knowledge. And if we were in a courtroom, would that be considered hearsay? They would also answer the question that President Trump's defense brought up today of, you can't impeach based on an unsourced book. You can't impeach based on anonymous reports. And so if you had living, breathing people in that room answering questions to the extent that they will answer, it would respond to a lot of the kind of lingering, I think, best moments that President Trump's defense team have had. But there's no legal requirement that there be witnesses. The Constitution is maddeningly vague on what a trial should be in the Senate. And so I think at this point, there's a lot more open questions than there are answers.
Yeah, that's right. We heard a lot from the president's attorneys today about the Constitution being vague. So, Zeke, our own Major Garrett learned that a senior administration official deeply involved in their impeachment strategy is actually conceding now that there's a real possibility that the Senate could vote to call witnesses. Has the president changed his position? Is this with the White House's blessing? I know he's gone a little bit back and forth publicly about how he felt about witnesses.
Well, this is clearly not the White House's preferred course of action. The president all along has said he personally wanted witnesses but wanted a speedy trial, and that's why he was going along with what Mitch McConnell wants. If Mitch McConnell can't ultimately get the votes that he needs to keep his conference together and block witnesses and bring this trial to a swift conclusion, the White House says they're prepared for all eventualities. And the president and some Republican lawmakers who are allies with him have made very clear what it's going to look like if Democrats do have the votes to call witnesses and try to call John Bolton or Mick Mulvaney. The White House is going to fight on procedural grounds, claiming executive privilege or other national security concerns that should prevent their testimony. That may get litigated through the courts or potentially even by the Chief Justice in the Senate chamber. It's really unclear what that might look like. And then separately, that Republicans are going to move to call their own witnesses on behalf of the president. And those will be people who are witnesses that may be politically painful for Democrats, whether they be Adam Schiff, the lead Democratic House manager, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, even the intelligence community whistleblower whose initial summer complaint jump-started this entire impeachment proceedings. It's not clear how many Republican lawmakers are willing to go along with that, but that is certainly where the president's head is at as this process continues. And so a lot of interest in the White House the way this vote shakes out, but they're prepared, they say, for all eventualities.
Absolutely. So, Jessica, let's follow off of what Zeke was just saying. We know that 12 current or former administration officials are still refusing to testify. If the senators vote to allow witnesses, and that means that Republicans, enough of them have crossed the line to say, yes, we want to hear from people, can the president still claim executive privilege to block those testimonies?
He can. So there's basically two steps along this process. And the first step is, will the witnesses even walk in the door? And that's what President Trump has done with respect to this impeachment process that's just different from what other presidents have done. He said, we're not going to take part in this period. There is no portion of the impeachment proceedings that I want you to participate in. But once the witnesses, if they do, actually walk in the door, it's still no guarantee that they answer all the questions. They still can assert executive privilege. In the case of Rudy Giuliani, he could assert attorney-client privilege. And at that point, you have a great jurist in the room, Chief Justice John Roberts, and he can rule very quickly on those evidentiary issues. So one other thing, there's a really interesting op-ed yesterday which said, and this is a long shot, but if you look at the rules, I think the best reading of the impeachment rules for the Senate is that Chief Justice John Roberts on his own could decide we're going to subpoena witnesses, and that decision would not be an evidentiary decision. It would be a substantive decision that could only be overruled by 2/3 of the Senate. Now, I think everything in Chief Justice John Roberts' personality indicates he will not do that, but it is one really interesting kind of tantalizing potential route to take care.
Right, Jessica. If we were actually in a drama, then that would definitely be the term. Yes. But totally agree with you. While it seems like that could be a possibility, legally, I can't see Justice Roberts doing that. I also want to play part of the closing arguments from President Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow. He said today that former National Security Advisor John Bolton's new book manuscript is inadmissible. Let's take a listen.
That was the response. Responding to an unpublished manuscript that maybe some reporters have an idea of maybe what it says. That's what the evidence, if you want to call that evidence, I don't know what you'd call that. I'd call it inadmissible. But That's what it is.
So is he correct by saying that? I'm going to throw this over to you, Nicholas, because I wonder if him saying that it's inadmissible, this book manuscript, if that doesn't give cover to some Republicans who maybe want to now call for witnesses, because if a book manuscript that's leaked is inadmissible, then certainly hearing from the former national security advisor under oath would solve that problem.
You know, that's certainly very much a concern that Republican senators have. But what I've heard from far more members is concerns that the administration will assert executive privilege over the testimony of any other witnesses that are called, like Mick Mulvaney or Bolton. And what senators have told me is that they're concerned that this could drag the trial out even further. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of senators on the Republican side of the aisle would prefer that the entire trial be wrapped up as soon as possible.
Jessica, you're our legal expert. Tell us, what do you think about that inadmissible claim?
It just really rankles me when I hear the word inadmissible in a Senate trial, because I know we're also using the word trial, but the rules of evidence do not apply. Let's say this again. The federal rules of evidence do not apply in the Senate chamber. So the idea that this is inadmissible or this is hearsay, those are great arguments for a courtroom. They do not apply here. And as the conversation that you just had indicates, okay, if you want to say that this is inadmissible, meaning we won't even consider it, which has no basis whatsoever, then the answer is let's actually hear from the people who are key players. Let's hear from John Bolton. Let's hear from anybody else who might have been a firsthand eyewitness. So I think that the president's legal team has done a really good job of trying to say, this doesn't get into the trial, meaning it's not going to be admitted, and two, even if it would, it wouldn't rise to the level. In this case, I think they're wrong on both counts. It should absolutely be information that we hear, and it absolutely could rise to the level of impeachable offenses. That's what we heard over and over today. Doesn't rise to the level of impeachable offenses. I would say this is quintessential impeachable offense.
So, Zeke, one other question for you. The president's former chief of staff, John Kelly, said today that he believes Bolton. Can you remind us of the role that Kelly played in the Trump White House and just how significant these comments are?
Well, John Kelly was obviously the president's second chief of staff. He took on the post in August of 2017 and served through the end of 2018. He was the Secretary of Homeland Security before that. He was somebody who was viewed to be ideologically in line and lockstep with the president on issues like immigration, but they butted heads time and time again on process and the procedure, the conduct, the running of the West Wing. And so just like John Bolton, he had a sort of an acrimonious departure from the White House. What's notable here is that he's one of the several former officials who know just as much as Bolton, maybe more, maybe not about this specific instance because he wasn't in the White House around the issue of Ukraine aid, but he saw a lot in the Trump administration, and he hasn't talked about it. Neither has Jim Mattis or H.R. McMaster, who served significant stints in the Trump administration. What's notable about John Bolton is that he is putting out a memoir in a month and a half while the president he served under is still in office. That said, is important. John Kelly here can be an important validator for John Bolton's account. He's somebody who's worked with both men, the president and the now former national security advisor, and he's saying he doesn't trust the president's account of this and his denials. He's trusting his former colleagues. So that is certainly something that's notable, maybe not to the senators, but in the court of public opinion.
Certainly. Nicholas, one last question for you. As we noted, the questioning phase of the trial is going to begin on Wednesday. Give us a quick glimpse for our viewers. What is that going to look like?
So what senators are doing right now is submitting questions in writing on these little placards that the majority and minority leaders in both parties will handle and cobble together groups of questioning. What I heard from senators today was that they're trying to make sure questions are asked in a way that hone the messages both parties really want to be drawn out in the last 16 hours of questioning. So some Republican questions might try to pry at things that Republicans have really tried to pick apart throughout the trial. Senator Josh Hawley said today that he wanted to ask questions like, why did Adam Schiff talk to the whistleblower? And you might even see some questions asking who the whistleblower is. Whereas Democrats will probably ask questions about Bolton or evidence of the Ukraine aid freeze, or perhaps some Democrats have said that White House counsel Pat Cipollone is actually a fact witness. So you might see questions about that as well.
All those questions and answers supposedly taking place in 5 minutes or less. Zeke Miller, Jessica Levinson, and Nicholas Wu, thank you all very much.